Hi there, my name is Jessica Crow, and I am the founder of Apogy. Apogy is a change management training, coaching, and consulting firm, and this is our Change Leader Speaker Series. And today I have with me Paul O'Keefe. I met Paul through the ACMP, which is the Association for Change Management Professionals. We were interacting, or at least I was reading his posts on our Global Connect site. It's a great forum to get information, hear people's opinions, and then we ended up both having a presentation for one of the chapters that the ACMP is connected to. And I was really impressed with his background and his story. And I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment. But Paul has a very long career in change management and change management consulting specifically. And I thought he would be a great person to come on and just talk a little bit about what that is like. So Paul, do you mind introducing yourself? And then I've got a few questions to get us started.
Thank you, Jessica. G'day, everybody. So my name is Paul O'Keefe. I'm originally from Australia, but moved to the States in 1991. I did my MBA and found this thing called organizational development, which led me to change management at Andersen Consulting in 1996 in Milwaukee. And then the rest is history. I retired in February of 2020 after 24 plus years on the line as a change management lead at Accenture.
Yeah. And I was mentioning this to Paul before we started the video, is that I have members of my community who are undergraduate students and graduate students who are looking for careers in consulting, and understanding what that experience is like would be really helpful. And anyone who is currently in a corporate role that wants to make that switch. So I know things may have changed with the pandemic and the amount of travel that consultants are doing, but can you give us just maybe a flavor for what your journey was like?
Yeah, so as I said, when I did my MBA, I needed one more topic, course to complete. And there was this thing called organizational development. I'm like, I have no idea what it is, but it fits in my schedule. Take it. Absolutely loved it. And I'm like, this is what I want to do. And I had a brilliant professor. And it was sort of like, it was a lot of things that I already did and knew,
right,
were encapsulated into org design or org development. And that really made me sort of think. I coach sports a lot. There was just a lot of, I was sort of involved in change in a previous job, just didn't know it.
Right.
I was more focused in my jobs on the soft skills anyway. So it was just a natural. So it just so happened we moved to Milwaukee that year, and I was looking for a job and found out very quickly that there's no such thing as an entry-level org development job. Right, most people sort of start out in training or HR, and then go to OD, and there's sort of the level of experience you have when you get those jobs. So I started to do my research and found out that there was this thing called change management, which was, at the time, sort of an offshoot of OD. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the big consulting companies had change management practices and so would hire at entry level. Mm-hmm. So at the time in Milwaukee, both Andersen Consulting and Deloitte had change practices. I applied to both and ended up getting a job with Andersen Consulting, which later became Accenture. Mm-hmm. So sort of after that, the rest was history. But, it was a really, if I look at my career as a whole, right, so it's, 25 years, and in so many ways, the things I did at the beginning, the things I did at the end didn't change.
Right.
Right. It's about relationships. It's about working people through change. It's the block and tackle of change is, training and communications and those type of things that, are sort of timeless in a sense. But then in so many other ways, everything changed. And the biggest change was the size and scale of projects. Right. So, big global, massive corporations doing massive IT projects. That was probably the biggest change. And I think the other change, at least at Accenture, which I think is somewhere where the discipline still needs to go, is around metrics and improving the value as you go of the change work that you're doing, and sort of moving more to a science-based view of the discipline than, let's say sort of more the intuitive, touchy-feely side of the discipline. So that was sort of how I started, and then, my career evolved through the levels. So, going back to your question about, your listeners that are undergraduates or MBA students thinking about consulting. So let's talk about, what the early years look like.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think that's what probably people are interested in. And then we can talk about how to get in. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, the reality is the early years of any consulting work is, it's the grunt work. It's the hard sort of, nitty gritty work. You don't get into sort of the big, I'm the advisor on day one. You need to build your experience and credibility, not just with your firm, but with your clients and your client base.
And really quick question, did you get any formal training on change management aside from your OD class, or was it kind of a learn on the job experience?
So I didn't have any change management training per se when I joined Accenture. There was training that was given to us, both, virtually at the time. So we've been virtual for a long time just because of the size of the firm.
Right.
Virtually, and we would do in-person classes once every sort of 2 years at our corporate training center down in St. Charles, Illinois. But let's say that was probably 5% of what I learned, right? The big consulting firms, it's all about hands-on experience, which is it so powerful and brilliant, but also really hard.
Yeah. Because
you tend to stub your toe and maybe even fail a lot.
Yeah.
So I would say one thing about consulting is you have to have a really thick skin. For two reasons. One is at a big consulting firm, your bill rates are high. And so the client has very high expectations. So what you think is good enough is likely not good enough.
Right.
What you think is hard work is likely not hard enough. Right. And then, the big firms have extremely high standards. There was a lot of clients where Accenture's standard was much higher than the client's.
Right.
And what the client would accept, we wouldn't accept. Say, no, redo it. It's not good enough. And so even if you did a really good piece of work, the question was, well, how do we make it better? Which is part of what makes the big consulting firms so good, but it's also really hard, right? You've worked, and so, hey, what more could be done? Or did you have it approved by these people? Or did you get feedback from this group? And, so it's a never ending sort of pursuit of excellence, which is really great, but it's also hard. So, when you start a career, you're going to be doing, as I said, the grunt work. And part of that is at some point, someone has to do the work.
Right.
What has changed over the years is that the majority of that real grunt work, so writing communications, writing training courses, doing, screen captures of, whatever, has been offshore. So the size of our teams onshore have shrunk dramatically as a percentage of the whole team. It used to be 100%, now it's about 50%.
Right.
So the stuff you're doing onshore tends to be sort of a little bit high level. Maybe you're doing the training design or the communication design versus the actual building of it.
Right.
So you have to hit the ground running. You've got to be a self-starter, which is sort of, what does that really mean? It means you've got to be willing to just get in and have a go.
Right.
I do say one of the things about being a successful consultant at any level is being able to deal with ambiguity, because you'll be never given complete directions. It'll be, go do this. And you're like, what are they?
Right. Yeah. If you're waiting for someone to tell you what to do, you might struggle.
Right. And I find, particularly with experienced hires, so if you're straight out of school, you sort of get the hard knocks and you learn. For someone who's an experienced hire, to sort of learn the unwritten rules of what's being asked. And the unwritten rules isn't really quite fair, because that implies some. But I used to joke about the secret handshake. And it's sort of like, it's so secret, no one knows what it is. But when you get a request that's ambiguous, at some point you sort of get what they're asking.
Right.
And when you're early in your career, you're like, well, what do they
What does that even mean? Yeah.
So generally in consulting, you start as an analyst, it's 1 to 2 years as an analyst. You're the bottom end of the pyramid, at least the onshore pyramid. If you do well, right, then you get promoted. And I always think of, as an analyst, you're leading yourself. The next level as a consultant was what we called it. I think Deloitte calls it a senior.
Mm-hmm.
You're leading a piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
At a manager, you're leading a team. And at a senior manager, you're leading a project. And as a managing director, you're leading the client.
Got it.
So, I had all of those experiences all the way through. And it's sort of amazing how, people want to say, well, I want to get to manager in, faster than 5 years. It's like, no, there's a reason it's 5 years. Mm-hmm. Because when you get there, if you don't have those reps, you struggle. Right. And it really is, as a good manager good consultant becomes a manager, it may take 6 months, but all of a sudden, okay, they can lead the team. And so we always want you a little bit out of your depth. So You're always learning and trying and bigger projects. And then at the same time, we don't want you too far out of your depth that you'll totally fail.
Yeah.
But if you're in your comfort zone, you're probably not doing a very good job.
Right.
Consulting at the big firms.
Right. Question for you. So you mentioned that there's, Accenture's been remote, I guess, in many ways for years because of the size of the organization. Yeah. And I know you retired right before the pandemic, but, has the way that the world has changed and maybe it didn't change so much for Accenture being remote, but how do you build, when you're entering into the consulting space as someone who is new in their career or even making a transition, relationship building, I imagine, is a really big part of what you need to do in order to get those projects, to get those assignments. Even if you're ambitious and a self-starter, where do you find the work and how?
Yeah. So in my pre-pandemic experience, right, the best way to build relationships is through doing quality work. Mm-hmm. So there's a level of people thinking that it's about, the suck up game, and it really isn't. Mm-mm. It's about the quality of your work, because what happens at Accenture is if, Jessica, you're a consultant and you're applying to my project for a job, and I've got a job posted or a role posted, mm-hmm. the first thing I'm going to do is look at your internal resume and call your last boss. Mm-hmm. And there's a good chance, in the change management role, I may know your last boss, but even if you don't, I'm going to hey, tell me about Jessica. This is the role. Is she a good fit for this? And you generally got 3 types of responses. The best response was, take Jessica. I don't care what the role is, what the situation. Jessica is great. Right. She'll work it out. Take Jessica. Right. The worst response was let's talk.
Oh yeah.
Which was dun. Which was cue for no, because I couldn't necessarily say it in an email or a voicemail, but it was sort of no, you probably want to look somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the middle of the road was, hey, Jessica's great. Let's talk about the role to make sure it's a good fit.
Yeah.
And so maybe you're really good at certain things, but not at others. And, we want to make sure that you're in a role for you to be successful. Mm-hmm. But the real relationships come down on the project, the work you do, the relationships with people on your project that create more relationships down the track. Because if I get a call about Jessica, it's take Jessica, I'm in a really good mood about having you on my team when you join.
Right.
So for you to create a relationship with me in that situation is so easy and quick, and you're off working and now you're building another group of relationships. And
right.
There was a point in my career where when I didn't get promoted, and I did think about leaving and joining one of the other big firms. Mm-hmm. And the number one thing that stopped me was this whole thing of having to start again with new relationships, with understanding a new secrets handshake, right? Not understanding the secret sauce of a different firm, and just understanding Accenture, the relationships I had, the credibility and reputation I had built was the reason I stayed.
I think that's
And
a really
so,
important point for people to hear too, because sometimes in those moments when we don't get what we want right away, it's a fight or flight, right? Like your ego is like, hey,
right.
I'm out. But it sounds like you went through that development moment
Yeah,
and came out on the other side in a positive way.
it's funny. It's funny because I was promoted 5 times, and eventually made managing director, but I was not promoted 7 times.
That's
So,
important for people to hear,
so there
Yeah.
is something that, like, once again, it's thick skin,
Yeah.
right? One, it's not being a victim. In some cases, there was a couple of promotions I was like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
In other promotions, I was just purely unlucky. So in
Yeah.
2008, right, the crisis of
Oh, yes.
2008, I was 3rd in the country in line to get promoted to managing director. And I didn't because they only promoted 2 that year. Normally we promote 5.
Mm-hmm.
So that was purely unlucky, the economy, right? Now it's funny because I look back and think if I got promoted then, would have I made it for 24 years or not? I don't know, right?
Right.
So I would say to anybody from my career advice was look at the long haul.
Right.
And, so if I look at my career over 24 years and I had some great projects and some really shit projects and I had great promotions and really non-promotions and some heartache and gray hair along the way. But I look back and I was able to retire at 52.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If I jumped around, maybe that would have happened. Right. I was,
Right.
a noted expert within the firm at the end. I had great projects. I worked with brilliant people. Going to have beer with one of them this afternoon. And so, I think look at your career as a long path and think about what's next 5 years down the road, what's not next tomorrow.
Yes.
Didn't really say that well, but I think the point came across, right? So, and there was a lot of analysts and consultants who were really frustrated when they didn't get promoted at 2 years or at 5 years or whatever that sort of next level was. And some would just tuck it down and, do better, and others would leave.
Yeah. The CEO of the organization I was at before I started Apogee would always encourage us, and this was earlier in my career, to not be so short-sighted, to play the long game. And I think that's a really important message for people to hear. And maybe especially now, we've got the great resignation, the great reset, however you're thinking about it. And on one hand, I think there's, if your work is you're suffering, your well-being is suffering, then that's one thing. But if it's your ego, I think that's another, right? And so I love that you have the experience that you have, because it really shows if you're willing to do the hard work, and that's the internal work, as well as, just participate in the process, you can have an amazing career and retire early in some cases. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And I think patience is the other thing I really coach young people new in their career about, is that it's not going to happen straight away. And, you've got to bring your A game every day in consulting, and bringing your A game every day just builds your reputation. It builds, your confidence, and good things will happen to those that are good.
Yeah.
And yes, maybe somebody less deserving than you may be promoted over you. But I do believe that over the long haul, if you do great work, right? And by patience doesn't mean don't advocate for yourself.
Right.
So there's a real fine line here, which is you have to advocate for yourself, for the roles you want, that you're ready for promotion.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you need to know that that's not going to happen overnight. And you can't play that if you don't promote me, I'll leave.
Right.
Everyone that played that game at Accenture left. Right? Now, people that would come to us in the right frame and say, hey, I believe I'm ready for promotion. Here's my options. Right? Then we would help people.
Yeah, with the
to get to where they wanted. So the way you handle yourself and the way you handle those situations, I've got one great story of talking about being your best advocate.
Okay.
We used to have a ranking system, or we still have a ranking system. We don't call that anymore, but at the time there was the top 5% called out the very top, and I had this brilliant senior manager that worked for me, and he said, "Well, you're going to rate me," and I said, "Well, very high or something, not the very top." And he said, "Well, why not the very top?" And I said, "Well, that's rarefied air." And he said, "Well, why not?" And I actually said, "Well, fair point. I didn't have a good reason other than my own biases." So I put it at the very top, and he received that rating. And that advocacy, I talk about this story a lot because that advocacy took 30 seconds.
Right.
We had a 2-minute drive from from lunch back to the client site. It was a 30-second conversation, and he advocated for himself. And he said he sweated for a week over that conversation and what to say and how to say it, how it would go. And he said it went way better than he expected. But,
right.
So you do have to advocate for yourself, but be very careful how you do it and how planful that you do it.
Yeah. And it sounds like maintaining that lens of curiosity, like why not, or having him go through that with you helps you ask yourself the very same question. And it gave you an opportunity to come up with a different outcome, which is really cool.
Yeah.
I have another question. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, on the flip side, as a boss, if you're not going to give someone a promotion or a raise or whatever it is, you have to have some good details of why not and what that person needs to do
in
order to receive that promotion, because we aren't always ready for that next step.
Mm-hmm.
But we need the guidance to say, what am I doing wrong, or what do I need to do better in order to make that step? So I think as a boss, you have to really think through how can you coach your people and outline for them what good looks like, and be able to coach them when something isn't right. Because very often when someone makes a mistake, we don't coach them because we don't want to hurt their feelings or whatever, but then they're not improving. And I would always talk to my staff and say, do I have permission to coach you on the little things? And in most cases, people would say yes, but now I had permission from them so that I didn't feel bad correcting them on the little things on a literally a daily basis, because sometimes that coaching could be, 10 seconds. Hey, did you notice when the client asked that difficult question, you crossed your arms? That's a sign of being defensive. Think about your body language under those situations to keep your body language open so that you're open to the question. 10 seconds of coaching and that person is better, but you can only do that if you've got a good relationship. And so one of the reasons you want a good relationship with your boss is because you get better coaching if you have that relationship.
Yes.
So go ahead with your question.
Well, that got me thinking about something else too. I have a question about, we've talked about relationship building internally and doing quality work. And I do want to get to the question around how do you build relationships with your clients, especially those clients where they're like, I don't need change management, or it's a line item on the invoice. But as you're talking about coaching, just really quickly, I think that this is something where, first of all, I admire that you asked people if you could coach them. I think that's such a wonderful way for anyone who's in a leadership role to create a safe space that is mutually beneficial. And I think there's a need for more of a coaching approach versus that you don't say anything and then you have a performance review and you're wondering what in the hell happened over the course of the year, or you're on a performance improvement plan and you're like, why didn't you just tell me, So are you seeing that too, or maybe there's still a need for more managers to embrace a coaching approach versus not, or how does that?
I think, one of the things I loved about Accenture was that was part of our culture.
I love that.
Part of our culture was you have to develop the next generation, right? So my job, wherever I was to develop the 5 of me, not just the next me, but 5 of me. And even coming up for, managing director discussions up for promotion, one of the discussion points is, well, where is your team? Who have you developed? Right? And it doesn't mean that you've got your people, but it's like, who are you developing, right, to take your place as a senior manager when you get promoted? So it was definitely part of our culture. I didn't see it in corporate world.
I was just going to say that is not
our
the same.
clients didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I'm a big believer in, if your first job is in consulting, take it.
Mm-hmm.
You can always go from consulting to corporate world. It's very hard to go from corporate world into big consulting.
Mm-hmm.
That transition is really tough. So, if you're an undergraduate, MBA student, graduate student, I'd seriously urge you looking at consulting as the next option, and getting those reps and that experience. And, 5 years is a healthy experience. And after that, wherever your world takes you, so be it, right?
Yeah.
So I do think if you're in a non-corporate setting, I would have the discussion with your boss about asking for feedback. Can you please give me feedback all the time?
Yeah.
After every meeting, hey, what did I do? What could have I done better?
Yeah.
Right. As after every report, what could have been better? And yeah, I think you need to force it in a corporate setting versus in a big consulting setting. It'll happen to you without a doubt.
Yeah. Which is really, I mean, that's a great environment to develop your skills. I think in the corporate world, there's a different approach to hiring and retaining talent. And it's you bring the skills and developing your team. Many leaders and executives, they don't feel like that's within their scope of responsibilities. You bring the value to the table and then we'll tell you how you did, which for better or worse, I think there's a shift, and not every leader and executive is in that, approaches their leadership that way. At the same time, it's, the environment, you're developing people, but as one, leader told me, there's only so much green space at the top. So I think it's just a different, different mindset. But let's pivot to the, just to make sure we get this in as well, the conversation around developing relationships with your clients, because that has to be a big part of the value and the quality that you bring as well. Yeah. What do you suggest there?
I would always talk to my teams that you all have a direct client, right? So the client doesn't have to be the C-suite. It's the person you're working across from. Mm-hmm. It's the clients, the users that you're working directly with. And that's your direct client, and that's who you start the relationship with. I think a lot of times people think, well, I have to have a relationship with the CIO or the CEO. Like, well, no, that's probably not going to happen. Yeah. But you're in the trenches with your teammates from the client. That's where the relationship starts. And the better relationship you have with your counterparts, the easier the work will become. Right, the more collaborative the work and the more fun it will be. Right, I remember
how do you build that relationship.
Right, so I think the first one is, once again, it's through your work. Mm-hmm. Right, so do good work. Right, the client wants to see that. A lot of times it's about just being a really nice person.
Yeah.
One of the things I loved about Accenture was literally everybody I worked with, bar like 3 people, I'd be like, I'd like to have a beer with.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, be a good person, be a nice person, be helpful, do all those little things that make a difference. That, you see a bit of trash on the ground, pick it up, It's sort of that type of attitude. It's not someone else's problem. It's my problem. The other thing is, be social. So we were really good at Accenture about being social. Mm-hmm. And that was really around the relationships, and partly it was having fun and letting your hair down. So I would say take the client to lunch. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean to go to a nice restaurant. It could be go to the cafeteria together. Right. Go get a coffee together. If that, do an afternoon coffee run to Starbucks or the local coffee shop and know what people want, and bring in a cake or something. It's like those little things that help those relationships. And I've always told people that when they had a really, really bad client relationship, right, with their direct counterpart, which happens, and that makes life difficult, I said, go find an excuse to get drunk with them.
Right.
But it's amazing what a shared experience outside of work
It
does.
really, yeah. I mean, it does.
It's really amazing. We were always used to do social activities with the client, right? In a way just to get out of work and, find out about people's, families. If
Their
someone's
interests,
got
yeah.
kids, ask about the kids every now and then, or, hey, how did soccer go on Friday night? Did Johnny play good? Those type of things, be a warm, nice person.
Yeah.
And I have had challenging clients where I have gone to lunch and sat down and had a tough discussion.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's going on? This isn't going to work we both need to be successful.
Right. Right.
And that relationship doesn't mean kowtowing to the client. It doesn't mean doing all the client's work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I had a manager once who I said it brilliantly. I see a real difference between client service and client slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was, at least that resonated with me in the sense that we're not here to do all the work and all the crap,
Mm-hmm.
but we are here to, be good partners and service. And so that resonated with me. And I mean, that was 20 years ago. So probably not the right best usage of words in today's environment, but hopefully people understand the concept there of, and it is easy as a client, as a consultant, to do too much of the client's work.
Right.
But yeah, I would say, like everything in life, it's hard work. And so you have to go into relationships, at least at work, knowing I have to do some work. I have to nurture this. I have to make the effort in order to, get this relationship as good as I can, at least in a good working environment. If you become friends and buddies, that's even better. That shouldn't necessarily be the goal. It should be, let's have a good relationship at work.
Yeah. Just small things to get to know people as people that alleviate some of the, you're humanizing the entire experience that way. Yeah.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
When it came to providing, you not doing too much of the client's work, in terms of change management specifically, how would you approach that initial engagement, whether you were early in your consulting career or someone who has the relationship with the client? I mean, what do clients looking for the most? And is it strategy? Is it validation of their ideas? Is it the actual development and delivery of the deliverables? I mean, where did you find consultants bring the most value to clients?
Yeah. So the easy answer is know your role and do that role. And it could be everything that you said.
Yeah.
Probably not at the same time, but one of the things I always liked about Accenture is if you join the project, you join the project for a reason.
Right.
And, I need 10 hours of training developed. I need you to create a change plan. I need you to, whatever it is, that's your role. Understand, your boundaries in a positive way, not like a bad way, but and then go do that.
Yeah. Clarity provides focus. Yeah.
Yeah. And then once you're on top of that, then you can ask, your lead, hey, what more could I do? But, the one thing is that if the client wants you to come in and create training materials and then you're advising them on something, I don't want that.
Right.
Not what I'm asking for, right? Go do that. And so, having the role, and even in the corporate world, know what your role is and get clarity on that, and then, focus and drive that piece of work. Then as the edges get fluffier and you can move out and do more and more,
right.
And very often the client was not happy when you try to do things that weren't in your scope, because then they felt you were impinging or you were trying to do their work or take over their experiences or make them look bad because they didn't come up with a strategy, but they never asked you.
Right.
So,
right.
As you develop a stronger relationship, as you see things that you don't believe are right, you then have an ability to have a conversation that's non-threatening about something.
Got it.
Where if you come in too strong too early, right? I remember a meeting that I sat through. It was a 2-day meeting, and I was just sort of an observer in a sense. I was the change guy, but I wasn't driving the meeting. And so the first day was horrible.
Oh no.
And I didn't do anything. And the next morning started off horribly. And about 2 hours into it, I sort of got up on the whiteboard and I said, hey guys, here's what I think that I'm hearing. And I wrote it up on the board. And they were like, oh my gosh, that's exactly it. That's what we've been talking about, blah, blah, blah. And then the rest of the meeting was great. We got on track. We got the work done.
Right.
The reason I bring that up is if I had in the first hour said, well, guys, what the hell are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I would have been kicked out of the meeting.
Right. You would have alienated yourself
right.
from the group. Mm-hmm.
And I was the only consultant in the room. It was all client people. And I was just a very low level change guy at that time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it was with a bunch of high level finance guys that, and I wasn't a finance guy. So sometimes you need to let things go badly.
Right.
In order for people to sort of then be open for the direction that brings them back on track. And so I think that's part of the art of the consulting world, is knowing when to do that, when not to do that. Because that night of the meeting, between the 2 days, my client counterpart, who was one of the senior guys, said, why didn't you jump in? I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
Right. I got to wait my time. And he was so happy the following night. He said, yeah, well played. You picked the right time to jump in and give it some structure on the whiteboard, play back. Here's what I'm hearing you say. And we got back on track. I ended up working for that finance group for about 5 years and doing a high level strategy with them and a whole bunch of stuff, because I gained credibility through that process.
Yes. Yeah.
Versus being, driving too hard too early, which I see a lot of people do.
Right. Saying like, this is what I know, this is how we should do it, versus allowing for that space to let it be more organic.
Yeah. So once again, come back to knowing your role. Now, if I was leading that meeting and my role was to lead that meeting, I would have acted very differently.
Right.
But my role was not to lead the meeting. My role was there to give some training advice, basically, in certain points.
Right.
So, and people may feel that, knowing their role puts them in too much of a box, but you have to nail your role first. So get clarity on your role and go do that. And that really helps build those client relationships as well.
Got it. And then were you ever in the position where you were out developing business? And if so, how did you sell the value or the need for change management on a client engagement?
Yeah. So towards the end of my career, that's pretty much what I did. And I never thought of myself as a very good salesperson. And I hated sales, right? And it took me a while to sort of work through it. But what I realized that my job wasn't sales, my job was solutioning.
Mm-hmm.
So my job was to solution, right, to solve the problem that the client had. So it could be, we have a global SAP project. We've got 30 countries with 100,000 people, and we need to roll this out in 2 years. How do we do that?
Mm-hmm.
So I would solution that. I would have an attached staffing and, budget and say, okay, this is a large project and the change work is going to be $4.5 million. And here's what we would do. And here's the outputs and deliverables. Mm-hmm. And, the client would say, yes, we like that. We like your approach. We choose Accenture. Or they would say, no, we don't like your approach. We'll choose someone else. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't sales per se. Mm-hmm. At least in my mind, right? I was solutioning the best possible, most efficient solution given their criteria.
Right.
So that was how I looked at the sales process. Very rarely did we do standalone change management work. It was always part of a bigger project.
Got it.
Right. So the example I gave, the global SAP project, maybe that was a $100 million project and the change work was 4.5 million or something like that.
Got it.
So I was solutioning a part of it and then helping the team, present that effectively at orals One of the things I did do on the sales process was be an orals coach. So help the team create that 2 to 4 hour pitch that was at the end of the sales process to make sure we did that really well and powerfully. I really enjoyed doing that
process.
So yeah, I think, as I said, very little was standalone change. And even if it was standalone change, there was still a solutioning aspect. It wasn't, hey, I need 5 people. We didn't do that type of work, right? Contracting work. We did, hey, I have a problem. Help me.
How do we solve it?
Right.
Yeah. Did you have engagements or client work where they didn't select to do change management, where they're like, nope, we got it, we can handle it internally? And if so, how did that go? And maybe compared to client work where they're like, yeah, let's do the change management, we need your help. So is there?
Yeah, so you probably had 3 situations. One was, we want one provider to do it all. And that would mean in the change work, we'd have a change team join with the client's change team, right? The second section was where they would want to split the change work, right? IT is done by someone else, change does someone differently. As a rule, I would not even bid on that.
Yeah, why not?
Well, the change work and the IT work is so quite tightly linked together that it is crazy that companies do that. Yeah. And I get the idea of I want multiple vendors and I don't want to give too much work to Deloitte or Accenture or whoever, firm, right? But so often that was a recipe for failure.
Yeah, too many cooks in the kitchen at that point.
Now, the one time that did work was if they chose an IT firm that was a very, very standalone IT firm. They went like with an India pure play, who didn't have the change management capabilities, then we would bid on it. But if it was against a Deloitte or a PwC, I'd be like, I'm not wasting my time. Right. Because it costs a lot to bid.
Yeah.
The third situation was the client says, I want to do it myself. So if they said that early on, I may not even be involved in the bid. A lot of times what we would do, it would be some point through the process when they'd say, oh my gosh, 4.5 million, we'll do it ourselves.
Right.
We would then say, that's fine, but here's what you have to do and by when, because I'd already solutioned it. Yeah. Because we had to hold the client accountable because, okay, the system works, right, but no one knows how to use it. That's not Accenture's problem or the IT provider problem. Right. So it meant on the IT side, we had to be much more strict about what our SLAs were because we all know that change is the hardest part of this.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You could have the best solution, but if people don't know how to use it or understand
so we
why
would say
it's needed,
the system works. That's on you now.
Right.
I did have one client where they did it and we had sort of certain dates where they had to have stuff by and they kept missing them. And eventually I got pulled in and put a bid in place. It was like, okay, we're 6 months from the first go live, you've done nothing. Here's what we can do for go live 1, for go live 2. We won that work and I worked at that client for probably 4 years and had it and grew to a team of about 10 to 20 people.
Wow.
Because they realized, one, they couldn't do it, and then they started to realize the benefit of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the other thing in the sales process, I would say, is one of the critical things is to listen. You really have to listen. I think sometimes as a consultant, we think we have the answers, and so we tell it, right? Versus listening and understanding what the client wants. I had a client once that said, I don't need any change management. And I think this was in a major meeting, may have even been orals. And I said, you know what? You're probably right. I don't think you do. But what I think you need your users to be trained and ready to use the new system. And then once you go live, I think you need them to be able to use the new system and adopt correctly to use it.
Yep.
So I think what you need is, you don't need change management. What you need is readiness and adoption.
Right.
And the guy was like, yes.
Yeah, that's what I
need readiness and adoption. I said, great. That's what we'll do. We'll do these readiness, these adoption.
Just change the words. It's funny though how change management, I mean, it confuses people, or they think they understand it.
Right.
And then you just, you speak in a normal language and they're like, oh yeah, that's it. I get it now.
So sometimes we are our own worst enemies.
Absolutely.
It comes back to listening, right? I had a client who told me that the CIO hated the words "whiffing." What's in it for me? Like, I don't care about that. We got to do this, this, this. So, okay, note to self: we never use those words or anything like those words on that project and that client ever again. So, just so often, when someone says we don't need change management, our reaction is, "Well, yes, you do."
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, okay, so what do you think you need?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or just listening to like, well, what my concerns are is blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, that's what I want. Like, okay.
There you go. Here you get it. Yep. Yeah. I like that.
Now, I will say that, early in my career, 96 to 2004, there probably was a lot of why change management? What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I have you on my project? After that, I've never heard that the last decade.
Right.
What I've heard more is about what value you're delivering, how you deliver it, right? Which I think are better and better discussions to even have.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of confusion around the value that change management brings, as well as there's this data point that's floating around, 70% of projects fail, and that's from, a long time ago. And there's an opportunity here for change leaders to better articulate the value that change management application can bring. And at the same time, how you do that, I do think it is somewhat dependent upon the organization and how you're evaluating on the metrics that you're looking at. But, we've got just maybe a minute or two more. Do you want to share how you would approach that? So people who are thinking about this as well.
The number one thing is, for me, is that 70% stat doesn't necessarily mean the project failed.
Agreed. Yeah.
It means it wasn't as successful as it was set out to be.
Right.
So there's a lot of gray area between failure and success.
Absolutely.
And so my perspective from a change management side was that my job is to help deliver business results tied to the business case that the people impact.
Mm-hmm.
So if the business case is replace 2 servers, people aren't really going to impact that.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something to do with we want $10 additional upsell per transaction from our salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
People have a lot to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I have to ask the right question. I've got to use the system. There's a lot of behavior change that goes into that. So most of that metric would be tied to people. And then I would be laser focused throughout on those business case metrics. And I think sometime in the change management world, we lose sight of the fact that we're here to do business related work.
Right.
Right. And so, if we want $10 of upsell per transaction, I better know the baseline. I better know what goes into that $10.
Right.
Is it $10 on 10 or is it $10 on 10,000?
Right.
And how is that tracked? And what am I going to do about that? And what behavior change can I even impact before the system goes live, assuming it's a system?
Yeah, what are the levers you can even pull?
And so then everything I do is around that, because at the end of the day, if we deliver that result and can maintain that result, by definition, the change has been successful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I've got a happier sales force, better morale, right, people working less hours, they are additional brilliant benefits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if I've got those 3 things and I don't get $10 an hour, the project is not deemed a success.
Yeah, that's an important way to, it's a distinction that matters.
And I think sometimes we get a little altruistic and we lose sight. This is change management,
mm-hmm.
right? This isn't org development, right? Which is broader. This isn't HR, which is probably broader.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we lose sight of the fact that we're generally here to deliver projects, and the people side of projects so they're successful. And that's how I would define it. And then all the other stuff I would try for, trust me. But I would know that if I got all the altruistic things but didn't get the business results, no one was going to thank me.
Yep, got it.
So, you've got to be very pragmatic in the change management world. And sometimes I don't think we are.
Yeah, no, I agree with that actually too. I think, the way that I have thought about it and approached it myself, it does need to tie to the business results. But at the same time, it's like, if you want to get in shape, you need to focus on eating well and sleeping and doing all of those things that will ultimately contribute to your ultimate outcome. And so I tend to lean into the process, which will ultimately deliver. Yeah. But I like how you've made that distinction, because if you lose sight of that ultimate end goal, then it's what are you working towards to begin with? So I think that's really important.
We may determine that in order to get to $10, we need a happier sales force.
Right.
Maybe one of the root causes that people are just bummed out and work too hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, maybe there's an org design element of needing more salespeople, right?
Yeah.
So, but you're still trying to focus on that end goal. And sometimes projects aren't successful because what they set out to do is not realistic.
Right. The business.
And so the only way they're going to get the business case approved by, the board is to put all this other stuff in, and then, we didn't deliver it yet, but we actually deliver what we want. So I don't necessarily know the 70% stat is a fair one anymore.
Agreed. Yeah.
But I do think it's a good cautionary tale for us to think about. And, one of the things, once again, what I loved about consulting is that we had a role, and that role could have been $10 a transaction extra. I do see a lot of internal change management groups get muddled over what their long-term role is, where for us, it was much crystal clear. So, I'm sure if you're an internal listening to this, it's like, yeah, that's fine for you to say that, but I've got all these other challenges.
Yeah.
But so my advice to any change management internal group is to be focused on project outcomes, to help projects, and the other stuff over time will help. But if you only focus on the other stuff, at some point someone will say, what have you done for me lately?
Right.
And you won't see the value anymore. Find the biggest, most complex, hardest projects that are most critical to the business's bottom line, and focus on helping deliver those projects.
That's a really great recommendation. And this conversation has been fun. I've enjoyed talking to you. I've learned a lot too. And I have no doubt that people who are watching this video, whether they are new in their career or they are thinking about getting into consulting, are going to learn a lot as well. And you also just dropped some great leadership and management tips in along the way. So thank you so much for your time, Paul. I really appreciate it. And I know everyone who's watching this is going to benefit from this conversation. Are you on social media? Are you sharing?
I'm on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Paul O'Keefe with 2 Fs.
All right. People want to connect.
Happy to connect with people. If people are interested in consulting, happy to reach out. Best of luck to you, Jessica, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.